Thank you for the invitation. It's my first time here. I don't really come to this side of the city, so I had to go to the mall too because I've never been to that mall. So it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I hope I can help you out. So I guess I'll just start with a story. In October 2012, so about 6 years ago, things fell apart. I fell apart. I was living in Boston at the time. I was just 3 months into my postdoctoral fellowship at Tufts University, and up until that moment in October 2012, things were pretty good for me. I mean, you know, nothing's perfect, of course, but all in all, things were okay. And only a few months before, I finished a year-long clinical residency at Harvard Medical School, and around that time, I got my doctorate in clinical psychology from Stanford University. So I had a wealth of clinical experience that was enriching and fulfilling. I knew all kinds of mental disorders and psychosocial problems like the back of my hand. I knew psychodynamic psychotherapy, brief dynamic psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, family therapy, couples therapy, all kinds of therapy, like breathing, you know, and I knew Ritalin, Adderall, Concepcion, Olanzapine, Risperidone, Xanax, Valium, Ativan. I knew first generation versus second generation antipsychotics. I knew that talking to a therapist had a better long-term outcome than medication alone. I knew how to intervene when someone was suicidal. I knew how to intervene when someone is manic or aggressive or hostile, when a patient is acutely psychotic. I knew what to do, and I was damn good at it. And you see, I was also fortunate. I was born in Iloilo. I speak Ilonggo, and I went to private school. My mother, like many Filipinas, my mother was a nurse. She's retired now. My father also worked in health and social work. And I grew up in Los Angeles, and once again, I went to grad school, where I was the valedictorian and the captain of my volleyball team. I went to an all-boy private high school. I moved to New York for college, where not only did I have a job Monday to Friday, but I did volunteer work for 2 nonprofit organizations on top of student awards all 4 years of college. So after college, and this was not mentioned in the introduction, after college, I went to Columbia University. So listen for a second. I've been to Stanford, I've been to Harvard, I did my postdoc at Tufts, I did my MPH at UCLA, and after college, I went to Columbia University. But after a semester, I left because I didn't like the program. You know how fortunate I am? I get to say no to Columbia University. I left. So what does a 20-something-year-old do after quitting grad school? I moved to Japan. Who does that? Right? So, like many of you, I believe or predicted that my happiness was directly connected to my external world. That I would be happy and happier if only I was performing. If only I was producing. If only I was delivering. Like you, I believe that if I work harder, I'll be more successful. If I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. Then things fell apart. I remember it vividly. It was October 8th. It was a Monday. I have a very vivid memory of it. So the day was very gloomy. If you've ever been to the East Coast or New England in the US, it's fall season, so the leaves are turning vibrant colors, but the air was crisp and cold. And a few days before, I had been feeling a little bit down. There was a heaviness. There was a heaviness in my body, a kind of exhaustion, and I felt particularly down. And I felt particularly exhausted, more so than usual. And I started crying. I was in my room. I was living in an apartment, sharing with 2 other roommates. And I cried, and I could not stop crying. I was so tired. So, in a very strange way, I felt very scared and relieved at the same time. Scared because it had never happened before. relieved because it felt like finally, like a tightness was loosening, right? Like an air was being aired out. A very heavy tension was being loosened out. So I knew what to do in that moment, and I realized how fortunate I am having grown up in the U.S. I knew what to do in that moment. I called a therapist. I picked up the phone, I called a therapist, and a few days later, I saw her for my first appointment. I wanted to be in a safe space. I wanted to be in a safe space where I could openly talk about whatever it was that was going on, because I didn't know. And I knew in that moment in October that talking to a friend or talking to a family member was going to be helpful, but not going to be enough. So I saw my therapist for several months. It was October, so I saw her up until the end of my postdoc fellowship. And I have never regretted that decision. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Better than attending Harvard and Stanford and Tufts and later UCLA and later Columbia. After years and years of studying and training so that I can help other people, it was time to take care of myself. In that moment in October, my body, my mind, my feelings, all were telling me to take care of myself. I did not hesitate to pick up the phone and I called the therapist. It was a defining moment in my life because I knew that taking better care of myself would lead to taking better care of other people. I tell you that story. From that point forward, something changed, and it is not stress, I gotta tell you. In fact, there are probably more stressors now than ever before, because here's the thing. The more successful I become, the more research, the more classes, the more consultations, the more technical working groups in the Senate and the Congress, the more speaking engagements I'm invited to, the more expectations there are. The more I work to be successful, the more I need to work. To get tenure, to get published, to get this award or that award. Maybe it's called hard work. Maybe it's called fear of failure, or I don't know, maybe it's called passion or commitment. Do you think that this comes out of the blue? Like this thing you're watching right now comes out of the blue? It does not. What you are seeing, what you are watching, this talk I am sharing with you is not something I just put together. I worked hard since Saturday to put this thing that you are watching. Last night I skipped a meeting and rehearsed in my condo and looked at my TV pretending that it was the audience. This takes work. And remember, the more we do work to be successful, the more we need to work. Because you see, I have more responsibilities now than ever before, and perhaps more at stake than ever before. Every time you reach our goal, the goal line moves. And every time we get a good grade, we need to get a better grade. And every time we get a good school, we need to get into a better one. And every time we get a good job, it's time to get a better one. So what has changed since October 2012? I look back on that day and the months afterwards, and I think, maybe that was resilience. That day was instead, you see, the hardship I faced was not the fact that I cried or fell apart or melted down, or I don't know what you want to call it. That day was instead a culmination of years of trying to bury and push down emotions that come from trauma in childhood. We are so good at pushing down feelings and thoughts that happened to us in the past. But for me, the combination of the stress, my clinical psychology training, and later my postdoctoral training, I could not push them down any longer. And it finally won on that day in October when I could no longer push them down. But I bounced back. Before that October day and the months and years since then, I was able to function reasonably well. I did all right for myself. Resilience is being able to bounce back despite hardships we face. Resilience is bouncing back and adapting well in the face of adversity or trauma or tragedy or other significant stressors that we all face. And the amazing thing is that resilience is not, being extraordinary or being high achievers. It does not require special skills or special training. Resilience is very ordinary, and we can all demonstrate it. And so here are some things that I'm going to leave you with. There are 3 things that stop us from bouncing back from difficulties and hardships in life. And we are resilient when we look beyond these 3 important things and we do not allow them to let us fall into their trap. And these are the 3 P's from the psychologist Martin Seligman, whose personalization, pervasiveness, and permanence. And these are just fancy things. When something goes wrong or bad, it is so easy to fall into the trap of self-blame. We blame ourselves. This is the first P, personalization. In the weeks and months following that day in October, I blamed myself for my meltdown or falling apart or whatever you want to call it. I tried to be healthy, yes, as much as I could, but maybe that wasn't enough. I pointed the finger at myself so much that I started wondering if I was fit to be a clinical psychologist, or maybe I should take some time off, or maybe I should do something else entirely. I imagine that you felt that way before. It was not until I started talking to my therapist that I began to change the way I think about what had happened that October. That yes, it majorly sucked, that I had a rough time, that I was so stressed out, but I also learned that it was a combination of many things that were out of my hands or out of my control. I mean, you know this very well. I mean, there's only so much you can do to exercise, to eat right, to get some sleep, right? Or to make sure you regularly talk to your friends or family or whatever it is we're supposed to do to take care of ourselves. There's only so much I can do, and there's only so much you can do. And that is a lesson that I learned from my therapist, and later from, I read from Sheryl Sandberg. And Sheryl Sandberg is the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook. And she also wrote Option B. And what I'm describing to you, she sums up quite nicely. Not everything that happens to us happens because of us. When we move beyond personalization, we become resilient. When instead of pointing the finger at ourselves, we use that as a way to take responsibility. Right? Not blame, but responsibility. And maybe consider other ways we can do better. Things are going to go badly for sometimes, for you, for me, for everybody, because that's part of life, right? But when we do not take these things personally, then we allow ourselves to recover. And that is resilience. Now, when something goes wrong, it is also so easy to see everything as falling apart. We believe that that one thing is affecting everything else in our life. And this is the second P, pervasiveness. In the first few weeks after that day in October, the first few weeks, the heaviness of what I felt was really hard to shake off. For sure, it was hard to do my work as a postdoctoral fellow. I felt like my head was in a cloud. I was going through the motions of my work, really, my daily routine. I still tried to stay healthy as much as I could, exercise, eat right, get some sleep, blah, 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 all those things you're supposed to do. But I wanted to run away, but there was no place to hide. And you know this very well. When you don't do so well on an assignment or on a project, you feel like everything else sucks. When you get rejected by someone you like, it feels like everything else sucks. And for some of you who have gone through very real, very personal, very heavy hardships, trauma, loss, violence, abuse, whatever it is, you might even look at other people, look at the world, look at the future as unfair and awful. The heaviness pervades. The resilience comes in when we take a moment and acknowledge that no, not everything sucks. That the hardship we went through is a slice of time in our life, and that it does not have to affect all areas of our life, then, now, or in the future. And one way we can do that is to go back to our routine, even if our head is in a cloud. Because the routine can keep us grounded, and because it will draw us to an opportunity to engage once again with the world. So yes, in the first few weeks after that day in October, I continued to do my routine, even though my head was in a cloud. Eventually, the routine was more than just a routine. I started feeling a bit better because I started connecting, for instance. I started connecting to the reason why I ran regularly. So, as part of my way to de-stress, I exercise. I run in particular. And when I lived in Boston, I ran pretty regularly, almost daily. And what happened in October, I was running, yes, I was part of my routine, yes, but I wasn't really into it. But being in the routine actually helped me reconnect with the reason why I was running regularly. I was running regularly because I was training for my first marathon. And so the routine helped me get back in the swing of things. So finally, the last P, permanence. So the hurt, the cry, the sadness, the depression, the anxiety, the worry, the rejection, the disappointment, the belief that I'm stupid, the belief that I am ugly, the belief that I do not have friends, the belief that my classmates are better than me, the pain with looking at Facebook or Twitter and then seeing your friends are on it while you're at home wondering why they didn't invite me, all these kinds of things. We believe that these will last for a long time. And for some of us who have gone through very difficult things, there's a belief that the pain will always be there no matter what we do, no matter how hard we try to shake it off. It feels like, it might last forever because of how heavy they seem to be. And we have this kind of habit, and I know you know this. We have this kind of habit where we almost want to hold on to our negative feelings, even though we want them to stop or go away. Like when we are worried, then we worry about the fact that we're worried. Or like when we're sad about the fact that we're sad. Right? So for some of us who've gone through very challenging hardships, like trauma, loss, violence, abuse, the negative feelings are almost second nature. The negativity is more familiar, so we hold on to that as more authentic. If it is a positive feeling, then that is harder to believe. The resilience comes in when we take a moment and acknowledge that actually these kinds of feelings are temporary. In fact, all feelings are temporary, even the positive ones. And the fact that we feel, and the way we feel is very much connected with the way we think. And so negative thinking leads to negative feelings. We are resilient when we open ourselves up to changing the way we see a situation, and therefore also changing the way we feel about it. And that was especially helpful for me in the months after that day in October. And it still helps me to this day. The way I think about stress, negative things, or other situations has changed. You see, I do not always have control over reality, but I do have control over how I see reality. I do not always have control over the stressors that come and go, but I do have control over how I think about those stressors. When you change the way you think about things, you can change the way your body responds to it, and therefore how you feel about it. This tells me that difficult feelings are temporary, since we can change them by changing the way we think. Now, just lastly, I want to be clear. This does not mean we should ignore our bad feelings. This does not mean we shouldn't feel those difficult feelings. In fact, I encourage you to feel those negative feelings. It's healthy, it's good for you. But what the last P of permanence tells us is that our feelings are not at all permanent. That they are temporary, and more importantly, that they can be under our control. And that is a sign of resilience. So, remind yourselves of the 3 Ps. We want to go beyond personalization, look far into the distance, far from pervasiveness, and see that things are not permanent. When we do these things, we rewire our brain and retrain our bodies to notice that resilience is not on the horizon, but that it is in fact already within us. Thank you.